looking for anybody that can bring something to the table, right? So they had a lot of young guys out there. They had a lot of guys trying to prove themselves on the field, because here's the difference, right? When we play the teams, I go through and I do my, like reports for the game. So I'm looking for players that stand out. I'm looking for guys that I feel like we can attack. So I do that for offensive line, defensive line. This past year, there's really never a guy. I always remember a Cowart at nose tackle, and I was like, man, he would make some flash plays. Like, it was like, all right, it wasn't as consistent, but you get some flashes in there. He could do some things. And then it was DeMarcus Walker. He was constantly the always guy that would, kind of come to mind, or the guy that I would have on my notes is like, DeMarcus Walker it's kind of an interesting piece because he does some good things. Thus, he didn't really feel his presence as much. But ultimately for the Lions and what they're looking for, I think if they found a way to bring in DeMarcus Walker, and I'm really going to be curious if they do pull this off, specifically to see kind of what the price point would be for this player, because obviously the Lions try not to spend a lot of money. I think his skill set fits who the Lions are and what they want to do with that defensive line and what I expect it to look like stylistically going forward and what we've already kind of seen flashes of. You think about those big DNs, right? Those guys that can play inside the tackles. Maybe they can line up in a 4-eye, which would mean an inside shade of an offensive tackle, maybe a 4 technique. They go head up with an offensive tackle outside of the tackle. Now I'm putting him in a 6 technique, right? Maybe I have him head up on a tight end and I got him go one-on-one there. It's like, can he dominate a tight end one-on-one, which is really where he finds a lot of success playing on that strong side of the line of scrimmage. And also keep in mind, the Lions is the right defensive end, which would be consistently opposite of how Aiden Hutchinson lines. Now, we know Hutchinson will move around, but he's a right defensive end. Hutchinson typically lines on the left side of the line of scrimmage, meaning that he's going to constantly get reps against your right tackle, right? That's where we try to get him the matchup, and we want to try to expose that right tackle. So he alignment-wise also makes sense there. But I think his physical build, 6'4", 280, 33-inch arms, which is fine. It just makes a lot of sense where he lines up, what he does well. I think what he's set to do really well is he's a slippery player. He's a slippery guy. He finds angles. He finds little pass rush creases to get to as a I don't want to even call him like a pocket collapser, though there is some of that because he's pretty strong. You can see in the upper body through the chest, and I think he does maximize some of that. You'll see his entry. Like if you watch him ever long arm, he's hitting the bench. You can see it. He works through that really well. He maximizes his strength there. So there's a little bit of like inside lock that he can create, which creates some knockback, creates some long arm opportunities. And he's got a little bit of that slither to his game. He's got some of that short area agility, which allows him to be a stunt piece, right? I mean, think about what the Lions, these types of players have been for the Lions over the last couple of years, and we're looking for 95 here. We've had that stunt piece, right? We've had the John Kaminskys that can either be the looper that had some agility that could kind of slide around, kick inside, which is a huge part of this as well. And have already told us, and we'll get to the needs here in a second. Well, Brad Holmes did. We want to use Josh Paschal obviously on the interior, specifically on pass downs. We want to use him on the interior. That's where he's going to add value. DeMarcus Walker also rushes in the interior a lot of times sub package. Now that doesn't mean you have to leave him there, but again, to me, he's not a dominant defensive end. He's not a dominant, like put him on a tackle, he's going to go dominate that tackle. I'm watching against Taylor Decker, and I'm not seeing much impact for long stretches. That being said, he's always been an effort piece. He has a good vision for the ball. He kind of works around through the offensive line well, but when he finds success, to me, more consistently than anything, is when he gets lined up on the inside. Because now that first step that feels average on the outside, all of a sudden it feels like it has a little bit more juice. It feels like his reactiveness gets up a little bit. Ability to put him over guards, that's kind of the spot of success. Those slanting rushes, you bring a slot off the edge, he's going to step inside a gap. I look at it like this. I look at it like John Kaminsky's retiring, right? He's retiring, the injury retirement. You hate that for him, but he's retiring. And ever since he's retired, I really don't feel like we've had a John Kaminsky type. DeMarcus Walker always reminded me of John Kaminsky, because if you think what Kaminsky added to this team, right, we may think of him as, I think everybody could, if you went to any Lions fan, you said, hey man, what did John Kaminsky do for the Lions, right? We could talk about, man, the toughness that the player brought. What did he bring on the field? If that's the question for John Kaminsky, you could have different answers across the board because stylistically he could line everywhere. He would do all those kind of like little things. To me, I don't think we've had that since we've lost John Kaminsky. We haven't had that exact piece. And now specifically this offseason and him retiring, obviously we're not going to be getting him back this offseason. I think he would add some of that back to what the Lions have had. I don't view him as like, well, he's your number 2 answer as a rusher. I mean, if he had to go into a game and start, I'd be okay with it, because if you think about DeMarcus Walker, a couple of important things here. He's played over 700 snaps each of the last 2 teams with Chicago. Obviously, as a pass rushing front, they weren't great up front, specifically this last year. And here's why that's important, because the year before, he was actually more productive. The year before this past year, and this speaks to consistency, he's consistently going to be on the field, and reliability matters. I mean, if we're thinking about defensive end just in general, Levi, Marcus Davenport, our questions are mainly towards those guys being on the field, right? Levi kind of answered some of those last year. But that's where the main questions are. Marcus Davenport's on the field. That guy's a starter. Like, that's where I'm at with it. There's no question about it. He's a starting player. The question is he going to be on the field? But DeMarcus had something a little bit different, because you're confident he's going to be on the field. You're confident he's going to be available, which he's been. He's been available, and he's been consistently productive. And when he has a better front next to him, there's a little bit more production that comes along. Like, again, for example, if you go back a year ago, he had nearly 50 pressures in 2023, similar amount of snaps, a few less stops. You're getting a pretty consistent, all right, I know exactly what this guy's going to bring, right? You're not getting a dominant, overwhelming, bull rush, speed to power type of piece. You're not getting a number 2 rusher that's like, yeah, he's the DPR. You just put him out there, let him go to work. Like, nah, I'm not getting that. But on third downs, I'll kick him inside, let him find some creases against guards, let him use that long, rangy length that he can bring to the table, that he can just be a disruptor, get in pass lanes, let him track down the quarterback. Then as a run defender, even in this scenario, like, I don't feel like there's as much jolt or as much pop at the point of attack when he's trying to set the edge. But there's consistency there because he does a really good job with his angles in entry. He settles himself really square to the line of scrimmage. He's really tight to his body, so he has an ability to kind of just be really firm at the point of attack. And then again, he has some of that slither where it's like, especially on a tight end, he's just going to overwhelm tight ends. But he has some slipperiness where it's like, all right, I can step down into a gap. I can hold the ground, and then I can step into a gap because of that ability that I have to kind of work some of those short spaces. So I think for us, DeMarcus Walker has kind of just been standing out for me in terms of the free agent market. The most interesting thing to me about this, and this is why it's really important to keep an eye on what happens here with DeMarcus Walker. All right, I want to focus on this for a second. I put designated pass rusher at the end. Typically, I would never say this, right? What I put at the front, what I put in the middle is two things I would never really say is like, I think the Lions could go get a designated pass rusher. Because I always know they like what they like. They like size. They like physicality. They want some length. They want guys that can collapse the pocket, right? That doesn't really fit. And I also want guys that can play the run. I'm the one that's screaming for it. Let's get better against the run, whatever that means. Linebacker, safety, corner, D-line, whatever that may be. However, especially with this news, the more that I think about it, especially if you added a guy like DeMarcus Walker, the more to me the door opens for you could get a guy that you actually just view as more of a designated pass rusher. I'll give you an example. Yesterday, we did a mock. I had a David Walker out of Central Arkansas. That, to me, he would come in as a designated pass rusher. But if you think about the Lions over the last couple of years, the Lions have valued designated pass rushers if they're very good pass rushers. James Houston, of course, was the most obvious example. We saw him last season. Let's not forget about games like Houston, for example, where he was the guy that came up with a couple of big plays, right? He got under pads, had a little bit, he has a completely different flair. He would bend, he was low to the ground. It was like a natural leverage thing. He was a little bit of a problem because then it was so much different than everybody we had. We couldn't find a role for him on rundowns. And we tried to, we're like, all right, maybe you'll be kind of the Sam backer. And then ultimately Barnes took that role over. It was like, all right, what is this role? But there was a value for him. It was just that maybe it wasn't as consistent, and obviously he didn't end up sticking around with us. There was that battle during the offseason in a similar situation because you weren't keeping him for what he could be against the run. You were keeping him for that guy brought something different, brought some juice to the table as a pass rusher. What we saw last season as well, especially if they added a guy like DeMarcus Walker, that to me opens the door for that a lot more, right? Because while they could get their number 2 edge and they could absolutely double dip and they could try to find the future outside of Aiden Hudson, all of those kind of things, having that guy that brings something different is actually a piece that's wide open for the Lions. It's kind of like DeMarcus Walker can fill that John Kaminsky role. That is a spot that is wide open that the Lions could fill. And there's a value with it now because of where they're at. When you have Marcus Davenport, Levi, and if you had Walker that can all play that defensive end role and all that flexibility you could have up front, that's why that's at the top, is having those guys. But if you feel comfortable there, you don't need to also be like, well, whoever we draft also has to have that upside to be able to play the run, be a 3-down player. Like, realistically, if you're not going in the first 2 rounds, you're probably not getting that guy. You might have to be a little creative with this role. But once you get outside those first 2 rounds, in most cases in the draft, you're a lot of times drafting a guy to be a designated pass rusher because that's what he does well. And it's like, we'll figure out everything else later. That's what he's going to do. Or you're drafting a guy that really hasn't put it together. Well, maybe there's some traits here that we can jump into. Outside of that, that's what you're doing, right? These guys don't last. Those players don't last. They go early. They go high. They're off the board. Going to be flexible throughout the draft. That opens the door of flexibility. DeMarcus Walker helps open that door. The door of flexibility for the draft actually opens wide open for the Lions at edge, where they can have their sights on, like, hey, we don't got to discard this guy just because he doesn't have the ideal build. Right. And it reminds me of when we took James Houston. He did something and he did something well. He rushed the passer. We figure everything out later. We'll try him at off ball. It doesn't work. But what does he do? He rushed the passer. All right, just put him on the line and let him run. Saw last season's Zadarius Smith. He's another guy thrown in this. Like, Zadarius could play the run, as mentioned, and that was a big part. I thought that he was interesting for the Lions, but it wasn't like Zadarius was he's a run stopper, man. That's his thing. The dude got after the quarterback. Where the Lions were at, they needed someone that could just get after the quarterback. So even if you just look back at last year, thing that I think Zadarius clearly was he's going to impact the quarterback. He's going to get after it. So now it was like, all right, run defense, yeah, he may add some of that. But the more I kind of look back on it, I'm like, I'm pretty sure the Lions' like first priority was clearly just go. Think about a couple years ago what we did with Seattle. Bruce Irvin. Now, that's a little bit different, right? It's not the kind of same investment. But they added Bruce Irvin towards the end of the season. Did they add him because they were like, yo, we need a little bit of run defense? They said, just somebody get after the quarterback. And I think for the Lions now, when we talk about, well, hold up, all these holes are filled. They can go anywhere in the draft. Well, that opens the door now to go in the draft and say, well, get that guy. If you want to get that guy, get that guy. Only on passing situations, he can be on the field. Hey, I'll take that. That dude's on the field 40% of the time. That's money. That's money. It's something different. There's actually a value, I think, to guys that can add a little something different. Josiah Stewart, someone with some bend, someone that can play the edge, someone's got some juice off the edge, like something that's just a little bit different than what we have. We got all these dudes that can kick in. If Pascal's going to kick in, he's on Walker, he plays inside. Who can get out there and really, turn the corner? And some tackles struggle with that. Some tackles are better against that. But man, like there's dudes that struggled against it. Houston struggled against that. And it played into our strengths as a team. It was like, oh man, that came through because they struggled to deal with that. And if we didn't have that piece available, I don't know if we get some of those key pressures. Minnesota, right? James Houston had a couple plays in there, but it's like not every team, maybe there's certain games that you like and maybe the matchup's better, but man, certain tackles don't do as well. Maybe they're 6'9", they're high cut in the waist and they can't get down that well. Fit, if I put this cap on, like, oh, they have to be the style, I don't know they go as Raku because he'll probably go high enough where you'd have to use a first-round pick. So that's where the balance could kind of come into play. It's different when you can use a round 4 pick on an edge rusher versus round 1 on an edge. But it's even the same conversation. Like, does Raku fit? I don't know. But it's like you're kind of taking away a player that can really get after the quarterback. And if this is how this plays out, I'm going to spoil it now. If the Lions end up adding a guy like Josiah Stewart, Jalen Walker, you know what I mean? Hey, yo, Jalen Walker, you know what I mean? But no, honestly, if they added someone like that, we're going to have to go back and give credit to the Josh Pascal draft pick, bro. Because Josh Pascal is part of the reason that we could do that a few years later. Because if we didn't have that, like Pascal, we know he's not like a great pass rusher. That's not really it was never his thing on the edge. But he's kind of like a core piece because of that. It's like, all right, but we know what he is. He's going to play the run pretty darn well. He's a tone setter on the edge. And it's like, okay, but because you did that, because a couple of years ago you said, let's get he might not be the most fun prospect, but he's going to hit people. Because we did that, now we can go the DPR. Now we can do that. Otherwise, we wouldn't be able to do that.